Alright, so Marine Le Pen finds herself in the crosshairs of another political assassination attempt. This time, members of the European Parliament's Legal Affairs Committee voted 18-3 to strip her of her legal immunity, which is granted to her as a member of the Parliament herself. Gee, I wonder why that is. Surely it has nothing to do with her recent surge in popularity, condemnation of Islam, and denouncement of globalism. Surely it has nothing to do with the fact that if she becomes the next president of France, the European Union will imminently collapse. It's already doomed regardless, but if she wins the election, it will certainly speed up the process. So the French judiciary approached the European Union and asked for the nullification of Le Pen's immunity in hopes that they may prosecute her for tweeting out pictures of daily life in culturally enriched areas ruled by Sharia. You know, the usual stuff, burning people alive, running them over with tanks, beheadings, all of these wonderful things that the European Union is so eager to invite into the West through their negligent immigration proposals. If found guilty, Marine Le Pen may face monetary fines and imprisonment of up to 3 years. It's quite humorous because these humanitarian and tolerant globalists who label Front National as a dangerous fascist organization are the same ones working incessantly to silence their political opponents through imprisonment and information suppression. This is but a glimpse of the West as envisioned by EU leaders, a European continent with callous migration policies that slowly suffocates Western culture and national sovereignty out of existence, a European continent where political dissonance is labeled hate speech and silenced with imprisonment. But I'm here to tell you that this vision will never become a reality, and here's why. The more the political establishment attacks common sense movements of cultural preservation and civic nationalism, such as the one spearheaded by Marine Le Pen in France, the more support and power that these groups will harness. Take a look at what is happening in Eastern Europe. Look at the growing support for people like Geert Wilders in Holland. Or as a more extreme example, look at the growing support for Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil. Look at what happened in the United Kingdom. Take a look at what happened and is still happening right here in the United States. The more the global establishment attack Nigel Farage and Donald Trump, the more they seal their own destruction. It's like that Inuit parable of a hunter who, instead of wasting energy tracking his prey, simply set out a knife covered in blood. As a wolf smelled and tasted the blood, it licked the knife with increasing fervor, ultimately causing its own death. And so, as establishment politicians smell the blood of populist movements, they attack in any way they can, not realizing that in doing so, they are speeding up the process of their own exsanguination. They have learned absolutely nothing from the successful populist uprisings of 2016. Do you honestly think that imprisoning the leader of Front National for speaking out against radical Islam is going to deter her supporters? No, it will embolden them. The political views and proposals of Le Pen are so exorbitant compared to those of the other presidential candidates that it will take nothing short of a calamity to dissuade the voters that she has already won over. And those who are still undecided see this blatant and pathetic attempt by foreign global powers which do not have France's best interest in mind to destroy her campaign and will thus ask themselves why there is such a concerted effort to silence her voice. They will learn that international conspirators who promote mass Muslim migration into Europe are the same ones trying to censor information about the dangers that this policy brings along with it. And they will learn that Marine Le Pen is the only candidate with the courage to speak the truth and stand tall against all odds. You are going to see her support grow as a result of this. I guarantee it 100%. So let me give this story some context, first by talking about Front National for those unfamiliar with it, and secondly by speaking about what actually happened to lead to her loss of immunity. Front National is a right-wing populist party that was founded in 1972 to consolidate nationalist movements within France. Its founder is Jean-Marie Le Pen, who led it until 2011 when his daughter Marine took over leadership. Now at its inception, Front National was considered to be extremely far-right. It pushed authoritarian principles and took hardline stances to law and order and social issues. For example, it affirmed its support for reinstating the death penalty and has traditionally spoken out against abortion and gay marriage. Most notably, though, are the anti-immigration policies and quasi-eugenic proposals. In 1995, for example, a Front National mayor offered 5,000 francs, which is about $800 today, for babies born to at least one European parent. The proposal was ruled illegal, but it highlights some of the party's extreme views in the past. Now, when Marine Le Pen took over leadership in 2011, she modernized the party to hold more moderate and pragmatic views. She started first and foremost by firmly denouncing racism, especially anti-Semitism, by expelling controversial members of the party, including her own father, after he made some borderline comments about gas chambers being a mere detail of history. Next, she softened the party's position on most social issues by withdrawing support of the death penalty and supporting the legality of abortions. Additionally, in opposition to traditional Front National views, she advocates for civil unions between homosexual partners. Now, by no means is she a perfect candidate. She does indeed oppose same-sex marriage, but by promoting civil unions, she has taken a huge leap towards social justice. In fact, it's estimated that about 20% of France's gay and lesbian population support Le Pen. I think this is because they recognize that multiculturalism and Islamic fundamentalism pose a much greater threat to them than social conservatism does. Classically though, Front National has always been a nationalist party, and she continues to call for rescue from the European Union and a decrease in net legal immigration to 10,000 per year at most. From an economic standpoint, she rejects globalism and welfare dependence, but instead champions a policy of protectionism. I will say this about Marine Le Pen also: she has done more to advance the cause of feminism than any other female politician or any fat, slobbering, pink-haired, pansexual Trigglypuff combined. To watch her stand up in front of the European Parliament in the face of jeers and scowls and booing and pierce Angela Merkel's soul with her gaze while calling her out for the destructive policies of socialism and mass migration is something that is truly inspiring. The woman is truly inspiring and should serve as a role model for both women and men, regardless of whether they agree with her or not, because she displays tremendous bravery when standing up for her beliefs. How about when she canceled her meeting in Lebanon with the Grand Mufti when she was asked to wear a veil? She accomplished more for women's rights and social justice in that single moment than all of her critics combined ever have or ever will. It does appear that Marine Le Pen has a reasonable chance to win the election. Now, I'm not ready to make any predictions at this point, mainly because I'm not French and I don't speak their language, so it's very difficult for me to gauge the political climate over there. If I base my prediction simply on what is reported on by the news, I will make a fool of myself. I stated that Donald Trump was going to win the United States election very early on during the Republican primaries, and people looked at me like I was crazy. This is because there was a concerted effort by the media and polling agencies to sabotage his campaign. So if you were only paying attention to the mainstream, the prospect of Donald Trump becoming president was close to zero. If, however, you had political discussions with people and examined underground movements on the internet, a completely different picture emerged. Trump supporters were forced to wear the scarlet letter T on their chest and be shamed as racist, sexist, idiots, xenophobes, and so on. He had a huge anonymous following which was hidden from view. The same may be true for Le Pen, but there is no way for me to know that. So I will say that it's almost inevitable that she wins at least the first round of the election. In France, a candidate will become the president if he or she receives 50% plus one of the votes. If nobody gets that clear majority, there will be a runoff election between the top two candidates. By now, it's almost guaranteed that Le Pen will move on to the runoff election, but polls have her losing decisively during the second round. But I don't pay attention to this because on election night, the New York Times gave Hillary Clinton a 90% chance of winning. It's looking more and more likely that Le Pen's opponent in the runoff will be Emmanuel Macron under the French Socialist Party. He is a raging globalist with full support of the European Union and is a total advocate of Merkel's immigration policies of open borders. In fact, he believes that France is capable of accommodating more migrants and more refugees. This guy is so out of touch with reality that he thinks that the solution to terrorism is to provide fighting-age Muslim migrants a 500 euro, quote, culture pass so that they will be deterred from terrorism by discovering the wonders of French culture. I'm not making this shit up. I couldn't even if I wanted to. Anyways, let me get back on topic here. This is a rant about Marine Le Pen's loss of parliamentary immunity, so let me discuss what actually happened. In December of 2015, a French journalist compared Front National to ISIS. In a response, Le Pen tweeted out a series of pictures captioned, "This is ISIS." They included pictures of a victim being burned alive, another of executioners running someone over with a tank, and most notably, she tweeted a picture of the beheading of the American journalist James Foley. Now, I do understand that this may be deemed insensitive and disrespectful to the victims, but Le Pen's frustration is palpable through those tweets. She appears to be the only one in France sensible enough and courageous enough to speak out about the dangers of a haphazard migration policy. And now, a year and a half later, coincidentally, at a time when Le Pen is surging in the polls, the pro-EU French judiciary requests his revocation of immunity and open an inquiry under French laws preventing the distribution of violent images or those that incite terrorism. Here's a fucking hint. If you want to prevent the spread of violent images in France, such as the ones of mutilated bodies and pools of blood inside the Bataclan theater, and if you want to prevent the incitement of terrorism, how about you stop targeting the only presidential candidate offering any real solutions to those problems? Hell, the only presidential candidate that even recognizes there's a problem. Fucking morons. They are more concerned about imprisoning Le Pen for exposing ISIS for what it is than they are about actually dealing with the problem. Now, this is not the first time that the global elite have attempted a political assassination of Marine Le Pen and Front National. During a speech in 2010, she compared Muslim migrants illegally congregating to pray in French streets to the Nazi occupation. 3 years later, in 2013, the European Parliament revoked her immunity, just as they are doing now, so that she could be prosecuted for her comments. Ultimately, the charges were dropped, but think about this for a second. Marine Le Pen's political opponents condemned her for comparing something to Nazism by trying to imprison her for expressing a viewpoint. The irony is unbelievable, but I think she summarizes it best with a tweet that she sent out following the fiasco, which read, quote, "We're quicker to prosecute those who denounce the illegal behavior of fundamentalists than to prosecute the fundamentalists behaving illegally." More recently, last month, French authorities raided the Front National headquarters at the request of officials in Brussels over allegations that Le Pen used European Union funds to pay for her bodyguard and assistant. Now, of course, they provided no evidence for this and claimed that the raid was necessary to find such evidence. Again, this is nothing more than a political assassination attempt. The conclusion is made without documentation or testimony, and then no expense is spared in search of supporting evidence for that predetermined conclusion. It's like if somebody pulled an allegation out of their ass that I'm a bank robber, provided no evidence for it, and then raided my house. Then all of a sudden, the dark clothing in my closet, the ski mask, and my empty pillowcases start to look quite suspicious, do they not? Because when you start with a conclusion, it becomes almost impossible to not find supporting evidence for it. But that's not how the scientific process or legal investigations work. It's like the whole Russian conspiracy claims in the United States. Jeff Sessions, speaking briefly as a senator with the Russian ambassador, is something completely innocuous and expected. However, when the Democrats have already formed the conclusion that Trump is a Kremlin puppet, such a meeting begins to look suspicious when it is anything but. Without proof that a crime was committed, Le Pen was ordered by the European Anti-Fraud Office to pay 340,000 euros, and she refused, so they are instead deducting funds from her paychecks. This is in addition to 3 other Front National members who have been charged with the same accusations. They have been trying to destroy Marine Le Pen for years now, and as her popularity continues to skyrocket, they are becoming more and more desperate. The political elite are literally fighting for their existence. If Le Pen wins, the European Union will not survive, and thus the blatant increase in desperation makes sense. But as I've said, it will not work. It will backfire. It will increase her support. Good. This is what we need. As the sword of populism is raised high over Europe during a critical election year, the European Parliament is not holding back to stop the execution of globalism. Just recently, they passed a new rule granting the president power to immediately stop live broadcast of parliamentary debates and purge any such video or audio from the archives. Rule 165 allows debate chairs to pull the plug on discussion, quote, in the case of defamatory, racist, or xenophobic language or behavior by a member, end quote. With vague definitions, it ultimately grants power to silence anyone who criticizes establishment viewpoints, especially over the issues of immigration. This targets people like Marine Le Pen. There's a revolution brewing. The European Union is the new monarchy, and 2017 is the new 1789. The ballot is the pitchfork. As open borders to Islamic fundamentalism ushers in a new reign of terror, the guillotine will eventually betray the proponents of this murderous policy, just like it betrayed Robespierre centuries ago. The heads rolling will no longer be the victims of radical Islam, but will belong instead to the globalists who invite the destruction of their own society and culture. A new France will grow out of the roots of populism, a France of liberty, equality, and fraternity.